For the people who aren't able to make it. So can you guys see my screen then on the Tuesday Mastermind overview?
We
Yeah.
can.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you everybody for making it on this Tuesday morning. For those of you who don't normally come, we hold these Tuesday masterminds for newer agents and but anybody's welcome to join. And what we like to start off with is kind of what's new with the people here. We've got a small enough group that we can do that. And then learn about if there's any challenges you've had starting this week or anytime, questions, thoughts, and these we'll call possible fire starters. And if we don't get to those later in this call, in this meeting, then we can do that on a separate meeting altogether. And so we'll go around there. We're probably going to skip our upcoming EXP classes at this time, but usually I will go over what's going on in the training this week in our EXP classes in university. And that's free for anybody to attend. If anybody was interested in taking a class, then I can provide a guest pass for you to attend those classes. But specifically, we've got special guests today that I've invited Julie and Jensen from Mauseth Legal to kind of provide their explanation of their services and why I've started to use them. And you'll start to see why I've started to use them, once they've been able to kind of give their overview of their services. And then we can go into any kind of questions and answers for them. And then from that point, if you guys have things to do and there's no more questions specifically for you guys, Julie and Jensen, then you guys are free to exit whenever you'd like. So, but now I kind of just want to give you guys the opportunity to introduce your services yourselves. And I want to say that since I've been able to work with you guys on a few transactions, and we just had a successful closing yesterday too. And so that was a great process that I've gone through. And I actually met them because I was in another transaction where the listing agent listed you guys as the preferred escrow closer. And it wasn't until at that time I asked that listing agent, why did they choose you as the escrow closer? Because in 17 years in the business, I've predominantly just worked with the bigger title companies, and that it was always the explanation that you work with the title company and you combine escrow and title together because both clients on the buyer and seller side will get some kind of a discount, and but not really digging into like how much of a discount and what outside of just knowing it's a discount, is there more to all of that? And there definitely is more to that side of it on the escrow side. And that's the part that set Mauseth and you guys separate from the ones I've worked with in the past. So there's a lot more value add, I think, even coming from your end of the escrow side of it. So I wanted to be able to share that with just with other agents, my network team, and so that's kind of the background of how I got introduced to you guys. And so since I've been digging in further and then getting to know you guys and seeing the process firsthand through the escrow process with you guys, then I knew that this is something I've got to share. So with that being said, here I want to introduce then Jensen and Julie. So go ahead. You guys are able to share your screen too, so I will stop mine and allow you to share if you have anything you want to.
Did that come up, Mason?
It does. Come
okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jensen Mauseth.
I'm Julie Mauseth.
And so I have a law firm here in Linwood, and we're located off 164th and Ash Way. So we're right across the street from the park and ride on the Ashway Park and Ride. And we kind of chosen this location specifically because it's a nice spot for people to get to from I-5 and 405. But what we do is Julie and I have been working together for a couple of years, and Julie has a lot of experience in the escrow business, and I have obviously the legal background. And so we've combined forces to kind of create this law firm and escrow partner for real estate services. And what do we do? So our mission's obviously, and you're going to get this from pretty much every escrow company, so apologize for that, but it's kind of an obligatory statement that we make, is to provide a smooth and fresh, stress-free closing for you while keeping everyone informed along the way. So those folks who don't totally understand what escrow does, what we do is we're in the middle of that transaction, right? And if you normally hire a lawyer, you think of the lawyer as being your person. They represent only you. Well, when we do the escrow side, we're in the middle. But by being in a law firm, it allows us to do actually quite a lot of different stuff for each party when problems arise. So we'll kind of go into some of the details of what that is, but some of the transactions that we offer for and we work on right now are residential purchase and sales. We work with vacant land purchase and sales. We do 1031s. We do mobile homes, which can be kind of tricky. And
I want to interject, there's not a lot of escrow companies that will close mobile homes anymore.
right.
You know, title is not required on that. And so the escrow officers at the big title companies will not close them. And so I get a lot of calls. We're very efficient at it. And so if you do have a situation where you're running into a mobile home, we do really know a lot about that, even though they're usually like $50,000 to $150,000 transactions. There's actually a lot of work involved.
Yeah, the mobile homes can come in a different way too. Like if you buy a vacant land and it has a mobile home that you plan to destroy on it, or your client plans to destroy, right, to renovate the property or to improve it or to subdivide it, you got to get rid of the mobile home and the title on the property first. So we can help you with that.
Yeah, it's a certificate of being destroyed. So we have one right now that we're processing through, where there's a trailer mobile home, and no one can find the title. So we are working through that, and we actually just got it closed.
So we also do commercial side stuff. So we do small commercial real estate properties. If you have a client who's buying a big high rise downtown, that's a different story. But if you have someone who has, wants to buy, a corner store or a commercial, like an eightplex, a rental property in, say, Everett or something like that, we work with those. And then we do quite a few, well, we're doing more of these now as business opportunities. And you might not think that comes into the real estate side too much, but in fact it does. So what we see is a lot of real estate agents who have clients who then want to incorporate the sale of a business with the sale of a property. And a lot of times you can't get someone to divorce that, to just do the real estate and then do the business at the same time. So we can combine that into one total transaction where you're selling the business and you're selling the property that's related, that business may lease from or is related to it. And finally, we do a lot of holdback agreements. So not so much, is there more now?
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys all know that, probably I'm aging myself right now. Probably 10, 12 years ago, we had a lot of holdbacks, right? The lenders were okay with them. Everybody was fine with them. I would see agents do it on an addendum 34. And lots of times, within that addendum 34, there's no timeline to get rid of the money, right? What happens if the buyer isn't satisfied with the roof or something to that effect? So we do holdback agreements that are drawn by Jensen. So it's a very clear and concise document where everybody knows what to expect. And I just have a lot of knowledge with lending, so I know how to get those holdbacks approved.
Yeah, and to the knowledge piece, so our team has over 30 years working in the escrow field, and Julie has worked as a recruiter for and team leader for a large office, real estate office in Bothell for what, 4 years, 5 years?
4.5 years.
And so she's really got this institutional knowledge of how, you know, your business works and how we can better help you in your business. And kind of to that end, one of the things that we can do is not only do we provide escrow, we draft powers of attorneys, wills, trusts. So sometimes if you have, say, a client who comes in and they're an estate or something like that, but then you go to title and find out that there's a different person on title, or something needs to be drawn up. Well, what we can do is we can just draw that up and close it right then and there. So you don't have to get other people involved. If you have to open a probate in order to get a letters testamentary to help with an estate, we can do that. If you have to quit claim people off of property or onto property before, after, or during the transaction, we do that quite often. And a lot of times where that comes up too is where people want to buy a rental and they throw it into an LLC afterwards. We help them set up the LLC, and then we can quit claim it right into that property. If you have a quiet title problem where there's some strange, you know, old mortgage that the mortgage company or the lender did not reconvey the deed of trust on. We just did this, what, 2 weeks ago, they closed last week. And we did a quiet title for all of the parties on that section. If you have a boundary dispute, now typically a boundary dispute, we're not going to handle on the escrow side, but we handle up front with your clients before the escrow so they clear it up, and before the sale, we can help them clear it up, and then, you know, you can get into the escrow if you need to when you get to the sale. Then there's just other weird real estate stuff that comes up, like septic, sewers, you know, those kinds of things. And we can oftentimes advise you on how to navigate your way through that, or at least, you know, minimize any impact to your client. You want to talk about electronic?
Yeah, so all of you know, are probably experienced in the last 2 to 3 years not receiving recording numbers from the county on the day of closing, which is why we had the Form 22Y, I believe it's 22Y. We do have the ability here to, I'm really excited because this is the first law firm I had the ability to do this, but we can record those documents actually in-house to ensure that we're going to get recording numbers for you and your client to just make the transaction smoother. I also like when we have very sensitive documents, maybe you've got a durable power of attorney, and that client's durable power of attorney is their only original document that allows them to act on behalf of this other individual. We can actually record that power of attorney durable and hand it back to them. If I'm going to tender that durable power of attorney to a title company, I'm now putting Snohomish County or King County recorders in control of that document. And I can't guarantee those people are actually going to get the original back. So this is just really ensuring your clients that their documents are safe and that we're keeping them within the law firm.
That's awesome.
So some of the other things we kind of do is with our agent partners is we provide kind of like trainings and presentations to them. So what is the escrow process? And Julie breaks down kind of all the steps on how it works. And this is really good for especially new agents, but also kind of like a refresher for experienced agents, you know, to take every couple of years. Like, how does this thing exactly work? Because there's always stuff that will come up. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. Or we do things on like LLCs and S corporations. So a lot of agents will have established an LLC, or they've heard about creating an LLC for their own business. And what are the advantages of doing that? What are some of the disadvantages of doing that? What is the probate process? So if you're representing estates, or you're representing, or you just want to know for your own family, right? We can kind of explain that to you because we do that all the time. And then how to stay out of, and what happens when you have a real estate dispute. So it's an unfortunate part of the system that it happens, but it's better if you know exactly how it works. You know, how does the legal system work when you have a dispute? What are some of the types of disputes? How can you kind of resolve it? What are the common issues that relate to agents specifically, but also that relate to just parties and neighbors? Because it's oftentimes neighbors, let's be honest. Do you have anything to add there?
You know, I just, does anybody have any questions? We use a lot of terms and we assume that everybody actually understands those terms. So is there anything or any terms that we've used that anybody has questions on?
I'll add the question for some of the people who just, they don't know what they don't know yet, right? So when you brought up holdbacks, and there's going to be agents that are just so new to it, that so that terminology for holdbacks, can you kind of explain that part of it?
Of course. So within an escrow, when there's a required holdback agreement, it's a negotiation between the buyer and seller and also the agent. So maybe let's use carpet for an example. And the seller agrees to a holdback agreement to have the carpet replaced, but they can't get it done before closing. So we do a holdback for the agreed amount that the seller and buyer agreed to. And when the work is done, we actually disperse those funds. So we keep those funds in escrow in our IOLTA account where they're safe. And we ensure that that work order is actually paid. And then any refund would go back to the seller or buyer based on that holdback agreement.
Awesome.
Right. And it is the third party neutral. We have an obligation to both parties to it. So we're not taking sides on that. And so we have to make sure that, you know, the actual milestones are met in order to distribute that money. Otherwise, we end up, we wouldn't distribute it, right? So if the carpet was installed, but the buyer wasn't happy with it, then the money wouldn't be distributed until the buyer's happy. Does that make sense?
I think that also it's very important, Mason, to really have that communication with us. What are those key points, right? Because we're going to read through that and we're going to apply, whether it's written in an addendum 34, we're going to say, so what happens if? So we can really create a holdback agreement that's going to go very smoothly for the client. So there are no disagreements.
Yeah,
Definitely. And then are there fees associated with holdbacks in situations?
Yes, we charge a $250 fee additional on our escrow fee to draw the holdback agreement.
Okay. And then is there a length of time that is like a limit? You're not going to carry and hold this for X amount of time?
That's a great question. Normally, I'm not holding the money back for more than 6 months. As we all know, contractors are backed up and it's almost impossible to get, you know, carpet or a roof done. So, you know, we want to give them up to 6 months to get that contractor. Generally, too, I would say it's really important, you guys, to get multiple bids.
That's great. Yeah, I'm going to add that this is a bringing up the holdbacks is just a creative way to get a deal done. So even though in the last 2 years, you know, we've been in the market where none of that really has been happening, but you know, even recently when I had my listing, the buyers have gone through it, and this was just this is the one that closed yesterday, that the buyers went through the inspection and then they requested a roof replacement. So then having a roof replaced within 3 weeks period, we had to figure out, okay, do we have a vendor in place that can replace the roof before closing? And if not, then that alternative would be a holdback if that was the direction the seller wanted to go. So in this situation, we didn't have to do that because the roof got replaced, you know, the following week. But this comes in handy if you come into a sticky situation, you have to think of all the alternatives, ways to get a deal done. So holdbacks is great, even though, you know, thank you for explaining that. Julie?
One of the nice things about having a law firm as an escrow as opposed to say Chicago Title is maybe people don't understand how Chicago Title works in terms of escrow, and I don't mean Chicago. I mean any title company that's not title company that's not a law firm, and they obtain their ability to provide escrow services on a limited legal license, actually. So if you go back east and you go to the East Coast and everything, escrow is all done by law firms. And it's traditionally been done by law firms. And so we get a lot of questions is, well, why is a law firm an escrow? Well, it's always been escrow in a law firm. And it's only recently, last 25, 30 years in the state of Washington and whatnot, that you have, or actually it's maybe longer than that, 50 years, that you have escrow companies doing it on a limited legal license to operate. So what does that do? Well, what that means is that those companies that are not law firms are limited in what they can actually draft and perform. Whereas a law firm, we have tons of flexibility to be able to work with the parties to figure out ways to get a deal done and get it closed. So if something comes up in the middle of it, we can work with the parties to try and, figure out some ways to close it, get documents drafted, contracts, etc., to try and get the parties to agree on something that works for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Jensen. We're in the business of helping you guys get deals closed, right? We're gonna get creative and we're gonna figure out a way with you to get a transaction closed. And so we're very committed in that. We're not in the business of putting up roadblocks. And so sometimes you do run into that with a escrow title company where they're not comfortable drawing a quitclaim deed, or they hand your client a blank power of attorney, and the client doesn't know how to fill it out, right? And so this is where we can step in. An example would be, Mason, is you call me and say, my client is going to be in Russia during closing. So then I'm able to draw a power of attorney 3 weeks before they're actually leaving, or, before they're leaving. And so the transaction's smoother. And we can go ahead and close with, somebody that they appointed as power of attorney.
No, those are great examples, because I know for myself that I've run into escrow companies, whether, because I'm using the same title and their escrow company at the same time, that a closer would say, yeah, they'll hand over a blank quitclaim deed, or they won't fill things out because they're like, they're protecting themselves because they're limited in what they can do legally. And then, or they'll just advise you need to seek, legal counsel for this, or you need to hire your own attorney to do this. Well, that's just one extra step. Like as agents, I want to make it as streamlined and smooth as possible, not just even for the client, but also for myself. Less complications, less moving parts will make things easier and not fall through any cracks. So and that's what I've been able to see and appreciate, that, oh, wow, that's where that value add comes into play. It's not even so much that that I thought the value add was that, oh, okay, title and escrow together means that they're streamlined in what they can do, but that's not necessarily the case either. Like and just the fact that when one of the transactions I had, just like they needed certain documents because the clients were going through a divorce, or parties didn't want to participate in the transaction. Well, they all were able to do it just with you guys. And so that's where I think you guys stand out on that aspect. So that's great.
Yeah, thanks.
Does anybody else have questions? Otherwise I will, oh, there we go. Rick.
You guys have preferred title companies that you like to work with, or that like to work with you?
That's a great question. I like to work with First American, not because of any title reps or relationships that I have. This is actually, just based on performance. They're faster at getting out the title report, but they're also, I'm just going to say, they're more lenient. There are paragraphs that they're willing to take out based on risk, vesting. I can reach out to them. I'm good friends with the title officers, which is who you really want to get good in with. And so I like them because they're more willing to take risk on a title policy than the other companies, hands down.
Lindsay, our other closer, just walked in too. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have a title company that you prefer?
First American or Chicago. I do like Chicago because they're fast responses.
She said First. I don't know if everyone heard that. She said First American or Chicago because Chicago has fast responses. So
great. And then my second question is, right now what we're trying to do is take a look at how our sellers can offer some terms in order to be, put a transaction together. So if a seller was doing seller financing, could we set up escrow with you guys where, maybe you're collecting both the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, just like a normal escrow servicing company would do? Or, was that something you guys would do as well?
So I just want to clarify, do we hold the money and then the buyer is tendering us the payment and then we're dispersing it out to the seller?
Could, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
you
We don't do that aspect of it. We do seller financing. We will draw the promissory note and the deed of trust. We will get that actually signed in escrow. What I do though is when I'm talking to the seller, I'm referring them to a company called Contract Collections. And the reason that I like them is, number one, they're going to hold the original deed and note. So a lot of times I run into an issue where they don't have it and they don't even know, or a seller doesn't know how to calculate a payoff. That's not something that's really easily done. So what Contract Collections does is they bring in the payment, they pay it out to the seller. It's a very small fee to set it up. It's like $250. And then they will actually send the payoff to escrow, which is awesome. And they will also collect the taxes and insurance. So that's who I always refer out to. And they've never honestly let me down. We're going to try to scoot in Lindsay into this video. Hey everyone, this is Lindsay Reeve, and she is our primary escrow closer, and she is just amazing. Checklist, she's on it all the time, always giving you guys updates. So she really makes the transaction happen and really sets it up for success.
she is unfortunately a Cowboys fan.
Yes, I talk about recruiting. I recruited her from Texas. So for those of you that are familiar with Pulte Homes, Lindsay was actually an escrow officer for Pulte. And she coordinated, and that's a lot of units, right? So she coordinated all of that because they had in-house escrow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Lindsay, because you helped with my closing yesterday. Great. The other thing I wanted to ask was fees. How are you guys compared fee wise with the other bigger companies, the First Americans, the Chicago titles? And because when they say they offer these discounts, when you bundle their services together of title and escrow independently, how do you guys stand amongst those fees there?
That is actually a great question. So every year, Jensen and we actually collect all the fee sheets. So we're really, really cognizant of that and staying competitive in this market. So we are, if you look and analyze it, we're probably 75 to $100 more on some of the lower price points based on the title and escrow scheduled fees. And then we end up being about $100 less on the higher scale. So $1 million plus, we tend to be less money. So I also,
It's actually, I think this shift, like, and then in the middle, I think it's between like 700, 650 and like 900 were exactly the same.
yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you know, fees on the escrow side, even title side, is all based off of a scale of based on the purchase price of the home.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a great question. It is, it's a sliding scale exactly based on purchase price. So the thought behind that is if you're closing a $5 million deal, there's more risk in that for a title company or escrow to close. And so the fee is then higher based on the purchase price.
Right. And frankly, we have to pay for more insurance the more expensive the house is, right? Because we are insuring to the title company as well as the lender that, you know, the liens and everything else have been removed. So when you do that on a much higher price property, our own insurance is considerably more expensive.
That's great. Well, I want to just point out the fact that, you know, I'm glad that you guys are keeping on top of what the fee schedules are for other escrow offices, because I was going to just reach out individually to all these companies, but that helps us knowing that you guys are doing that on a proactive basis. And the fact that you guys are in the middle of the pack and you guys aren't the cheapest, you're not the most expensive, that helps provide that additional value to what you guys, you know, bring to the table, that I don't think that any other escrow companies that I've experienced with, you know, can provide, you know, with that whole ease and smoothness of getting a transaction closed. And then most of the time there isn't any problems. But when a problem does arise, just knowing that I don't have to go reach out to outside of just already with what you guys have in-house, that you know, it'll just provide more confidence to the clients that, hey, I know what I'm doing, and not making things more complicated for them. So that is what I want to be able to add to that. Now, anybody else have questions? Awesome.
Hey, I do actually.
Got
Hey,
Al.
this is Alex Louis over at Cross Country Mortgage. So my question is with quick claims with after the closing or transaction. So, you know, I always run up with clients that, you know, they're either trying to add someone or take someone off title or the deed after closing. How does that work being involved on the attorney side?
So it depends on what they're trying to do. Okay. So if they are trying to put the property into an LLC, it's very straightforward, but they got to check with their lender first to ensure that there's no due on sale clause implications. Provided that, and typically there's not. However, I think if you have a Fannie Mae loan or a loan that has been sold to Fannie Mae, then you can kind of get into complications. But typically it's not a problem to transfer a property into an LLC, so long as the ownership interests that were in the property originally are the same percentages ownership of the LLC. If you do it that way, then you don't have any excise tax implications.
Yeah.
If you start adding people or subtracting people after the sale, then you come into excise tax issues. And you either need to figure out if you're going to do this as a gift to add someone on, or conversely to take the person off, in which case that person will likely need to file a gift tax return with the IRS at the end of the year, which is not to say that there is any taxes actually owed. Rather, it's just a reporting structure that you need to provide to the IRS so that they can keep track of how much of the lifetime gift tax exemption that you have used. And so it all depends on the situation, but those are kind of two common issues. One is giving it to LLCs and one is getting a person on or off. And the way around the excise tax in the on or off situation is by doing it as a gift. Now, if you're selling it and whatnot, that's a totally different story. That's very straightforward, but that's just a sale again.
I would also like to add on that. Obviously, you're a lender, so you have a lot of background on that. And there is a due on sell clause, honestly, in quite a few transactions. I mean,
It's in every single promissory note, and I happen to know because I have litigated foreclosures on those, probably 100 different foreclosures. So,
and I would say where the lender really sees that, you know, the due on sell clause being really broken is when you're adding on and taking off people that were approved based on that credit of that loan. So they don't want somebody quit claiming on that might have a judgment or a lien, right? That's really, really important.
Yeah.
Because now you're risking the lender's first lien position as far as the credibility and the ability to pay. So for me, when I'm talking to clients, I really go over that and explain that to them. Generally, I will have Jensen write something up to where they understand that they could be triggering the due on sell clause. But lots of times it would be, let's say you guys have investors that are flipping. Some lenders don't like to lend or extend on an LLC. Some are very good at it. With that being said, if the two partners actually have an LLC, and like Jensen said, we're not really changing ownership. So it's called a mere change of identity, content, and form. And so if we're taking two individuals that are managing members of an LLC and they both own 50%, then we're not technically, you know, changing ownership as far as the entity itself or the two individuals.
Understood. Okay.
Does that answer
Thank
your
you.
question?
It does in very much detail. So thank you for sharing all sides of the coin. So thank you so much for reiterating that. And then also, you know, appreciate you guys touching base on specific POAs too, because those are super huge on my side to deal with, especially with, you know, military or, you know, people that are traveling, right, during
and you can have different types of powers of attorney too, and we kind of draft them all up. So you can have the limited ones, or you can have general powers of attorney.
Yes. Okay.
Right. So the limited ones are, hey, we're just giving you the power of attorney or to complete this transaction right now with this property. And a more general power of attorney obviously is, hey, you can access my bank accounts and everything else, and pay my bills for me. But we can do the gamut between all of those.
And I would also like to say, and you already know this, is that as an agent, if your client needs a power of attorney, we draft that specific power of attorney to sell or encumber, like Jensen said. So it has that tax parcel number, the legal description of the transaction we're closing. That's really what a lender wants to see, because there's certain verbiage in that. But when we draw that, we're going to email it over to the lender and title company for approval. So that's just kind of an extra step that we do, so there's no issues at closing.
Understood. Thank you.
Hey, Lindsay's got a closing that she's got to run to. I just wanted to make sure that everyone had a chance to meet Lindsay. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Lindsay.
thanks, Lindsay.
Another great example that you brought up there, just on talking about this aspect. Gianni had a transaction she closed, and you know, this whole part of Alex bringing up a situation where people want to either add parties to a contract or onto title, and so Gianni had something like that similar. So if Gianni, if you have a question regarding this, you can bring it up too. But yeah, these kind of concepts is great that you guys can help navigate, or at least have a discussion just to figure out, you know, what are the obstacles that can come into play, or how to solve it, or what possible things, outcomes that can come from a situation like that. I do have a question that David has brought up with a possible transaction that may come out of it, and your take on where seller is taking what do we call it, post-closing possession. So if the buyer is closing, on today and closing today, but they're not able to take possession until next week to give seller time to move. I come from a standpoint that, if we can at all eliminate that, then that is the preferred way. Right. So what is your take on that kind of situation? On that type of post.
Transaction. Well, what I will say is, and you guys have all experienced this, 10 months ago, buyers were giving the seller everything, right? So if they wanted to stay in the house for a month, they were going to allow that seller to do so just to get their offer accepted. Whether, they're waiving inspection, even, gap on appraisal, things of that nature. So what I always tell them is that they need to make sure that their insurance binder is in effect, right? So I've already transferred the deed and ownership. So the buyer needs to make sure that their homeowner's policy is in effect at the day of closing, because we don't want any issues. Let's say the house burned down. Okay, whose insurance company is going to cover that? Generally, binders are effective the day of closing, but those are questions that you really want to ask. I mean, I'm very conservative personally as far as my property is concerned. So I would even have an umbrella policy, or actually ask the buyer if somebody slipped, fell, was hurt on the property, then you're probably going to have litigation, correct?
Yeah. I mean, you'll have litigation, but look, it's all a risk analysis of what the seller and the buyer want to take on, right? And if we can get rid of it completely, or if the parties can get rid of it completely through negotiation and whatnot, then that's best. But if the seller needs, if the buyer needs to provide that through 65B or whatever in order to complete the deal, then that's kind of the decision they're making, right? And they just need to figure out a way to minimize the risk that they have in that through ensuring that they have the proper insurance, and making sure and very clear what the condition of the property was at the day of closing versus the condition of the property at the day of eventual possession, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part. If you're representing the buyer, you're going to want a walkthrough, right?
In a video walkthrough.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great point. You want to make sure that they have time to walk through the property prior to, the seller leaving the state or whatever, because you're not going to, once you occupy the property, it's going to be more difficult for you to get, any item from the seller.
And one thing you can structure into the deal too is you can structure in like a security deposit holdback for kind of like you're in a rental, right? And you have a whole, and because it's the exact same thing, you have just a holdback of a couple grand or whatever to pay for any damages that the seller ends up causing during that period between closing and possession.
I find that's very effective as well to really make everybody comfortable with it, right? If that absolutely is a negotiation and it has to happen, maybe their house isn't closing on their purchase for 3 weeks. So the only way you guys can make the deal happen is delayed possession. Having that holdback makes the seller feel a lot safer. And generally the seller is, it's not like they're writing a check. It's just being held out of their net sale proceeds. So, they're not coming in with cash to close.
Excellent. I love that idea that, that you guys brought that up. So David, there you go. There's an answer to that situation. So,
That was awesome.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes. So I have a transaction like earlier that they're using the legal firm to close also, but then we have an instant that there's 3 people in the transaction. So the brother and the sisters is into one agreement to purchase, but then only 2 is on the loan side, and the other persons want to be on title itself, but just want to put the same amount as down payment. But at the end, before closing, the lender said that the brother cannot be on the title because he's not on the loan, but suggesting him to be on quitclaim deed after a few months of closing the deal. So are you familiar with that?
I am. I don't think it's ideal. I mean, I'm just going to tell you right now, I get documents from lenders with all 3 vested on title that are not on the loan app, right? At all. You could have a husband and wife, and the wife or the husband isn't creditworthy, and the husband's only doing the loan, or the wife is only doing the loan. I honestly can't think of a transaction in 5 years where the lender did not allow that. So I don't really know the file, or I don't have intimate knowledge, but that would be not ideal in the sense of now they're going to have excise.
Yeah, so what's going to happen in that situation is if the two brother and sister, whomever, A and B, who are on title and who are on the loan, they transfer a portion of their interest to C via quitclaim deed to put that person on title. That will technically trigger the due on sale clause, which could make, if the lender finds out, which would make you, number one, it would breach a contract with the lender. So the lender could call the note due and foreclose right away if they wanted to. And the whole reason for the lender having that ability to do that is to protect their security interest. Because if someone else gets added to the title, that other person could, say, not pay their taxes, or they could have a personal injury judgment or something else like that, which, if the process were done the right way, could supersede the first position lien of the lender, which then the lender doesn't have security for their loan anymore. And so they don't like it. So that's not a good situation to be in for those 3 people to try and sneak something. Well, I don't want to say sneak, but they want to get their friend on, or they want to get C on to title, but it's probably not a good way to do it. Now, alternatively, the question would be is why do they want to have them on title? Right?
Well, because he put in money with the sisters, and then the lender at first, when we do the loan, he think the brother can be on, but at the end, because of FHA loan allowed the person on title unless they on the loan also. But then he said that if you wait a few months after closing, you can add him on as a quitclaim deed.
If the lender is okay with it, that can happen. There will be an excise tax implication with it that'll need to be done via, because money was involved.
It's 1.78. So if they're holding title a third, Snohomish County and King County look at that as consideration because it's relief of debt technically, right? So if a third person goes on title, they're going to pay 1.78, a third of that total debt of the mortgage, right? So if you have a mortgage of $1 million, excise could get very, very expensive. Honestly, I would love to hear from the gentleman at Cross Country, because I honestly would not mess with FHA.
The other thing to do is there's other options to secure that person's interest in the property, given the amount of money that they've put in. And one of the ways you could do that is you could do it via a promissory note, and a second position deed of trust, which would ensure that whenever the house gets sold, they get their money back plus interest over time. And you could make that promissory note due, you know, one payment due in 30 years with interest accruing until then. And it's just one big balloon payment when the property sells or when some person passes away, right? Or you could make it written into a will, or you could have the property, another way you could do it, well, you'd have to check this one with the lender as well, but you could it would be zero excise tax, as you could have the A and B put the property into a trust, have the trust such that if the property sells, it benefits A, B, and C, right, to pay back C's interest in the property. So there's ways to deal with it without actually putting them on title and having a problem with the loan.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind. The brother doesn't mind that he helped them put money in as a gift. At the end, that's what we have to do. He write a note as a gift instead of being entitled. So, but I'm just curious if they could claim later. That's all. Yeah.
I mean, technically they can, right? There's nothing that would legally prevent them, but there's implications that might derive from it.
I see. Thank you.
Would you recommend a way to prevent that from happening, or is there a way that it could have been structured beforehand? Did you just get the person C on the loan and just go that route?
That's preferable.
And I would say also there's just a lot of conversations with the lender, right? When a lender runs that name, and for any judgments, the credit report, as well as title, does the title search on every individual's name. So we want to have that conversation ahead of time. So at the last minute, the lender's saying, I'm sorry, he's not allowed to be on title, right?
So you don't have that situation.
Yeah, I mean, the thing of it is that is so unfortunate for you, because that question could be asked and solved way before prior to closing, you know? So I definitely, you know, especially with FHA, you know, you want to reach out and really ask some of those questions for them or to them.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Mason, the earlier you find out that you have that situation, then you can kind of brainstorm different ways to resolve each individual's interests of what they actually want. Because, you know, it may not be, I want title. Well, why do you want title? Well, I want to ensure that I get my money out of this property when it sells in 10 years. Okay, if you can't get on title, there's other ways we can address that issue, right?
Yeah. So in essence, they need to consult with you before all of this happens. So
yeah, and so sometimes what we do is we set it, well, not sometimes, we do a lot of pre-escrows. Yes. So we'll have clients, if you have a seller that has an issue or you just want to set it up ahead of time, we will set up the escrow before the property is even listed. And in doing that, we can address some of these issues as they come up if we know about them. Now, obviously that situation's with a buyer, but if you had, you know, a probate or something like that, or powers of attorney issues, we can address those ahead of time with the sellers.
Well, and this is what's great, and this is a great opportunity for those of you that don't order a listing title right away. Really get into that practice, because there's a lot of good information out there. A lot of times your client doesn't know that they don't have the right to sell the property, like Jensen had mentioned earlier.
That happens more often than you think.
So on a pre-escrow, you guys, we're not only getting title, but we're sending out that seller information form. We're asking them who their mortgage is with. Do they have an HOA? Do they have leased equipment? Maybe a propane tank, maybe a security system. So with that being said, we're able to get all that information. So if you guys get an offer that's a cash deal that needs to close in 10 days, we're ready to go. We're already ready to go. But it's just a great practice to do for doing that pre-escrow. So it runs smoother and we can do anything or fix anything or solve anything that might arise prior to you guys going mutual.
So to wrap up, I'm going to ask a wrapping up question. In this market, the way we're seeing things going and the way the buyers have a little bit more control over the escrow, why can't I, as a buyer's agent, start, no matter what the seller is requesting, why can't I start requesting that we open up escrow with you?
You can.
And you know what? This is such a great question because I script my buyer's agents right now. Like they'll be like, Julie, you know, they'll call me and go, I got a buyer side. I got a buyer side. So I'm really working with those agents on scripting. And, you know, it's especially in this market, you know, it's like, hey, listing, broker, seller, I already have escrow opened up. The offer tendered is, you know, what the only thing that's, you know, we're going to negotiate is escrow. And you would be shocked at how many listing agents are like, that's fine. I mean, I have one agent that primarily does buyers, and she probably gets me escrows on the buy side 50% of the time.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. And I'm glad that Rick brought that up, because even this last other transaction that I've got, you know, it was the listing agent that had listed out their preferred title and escrow. Well, I went with their title, but I put Jensen and Mauseth Legal as the escrow. So you can definitely do that. And this is why it was important that I needed for the rest of you guys to actually see and meet them and know what their services are, what they can provide, not just to you, but to your clients. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think that's a wrap up. We're at that 9:01. So thank you again for taking the time to meet with us and everybody on this call. And for those who aren't able to make it, I've got it recorded, so I will be passing it on.
So Mason, I'd just like to close out by saying, thank you for your time. Thank you for having us. We're happy to answer any legal questions that you may have or escrow or that anyone has. We do it for agents all the time, and happy to do it. And typically, if I don't know the answer to the legal question right away, or we can't address the legal issue in-house, I know someone who can. So we're happy to provide referrals for all kinds of things like family law and criminal matters too. If someone gets a ticket, we know a good attorney for that. So.
Well, I also want to add, you know, I don't want to like get 30 phone calls on a Saturday, but I do have a lot of agents that, you know, they text me directly, they have my cell phone number. And so I do answer those questions on the weekend. They might have a situation over the weekend where they need an answer on Saturday. And so I do text back and I do take calls. I had an agent call me on Saturday last week and say, do you do mobile homes? I have a mobile home. Can you do it? And I'm like, sure, you know, and so he said, great. So those are things that I do. And I kind of take that heavy lifting off of Lindsay in order to provide that service for you guys, because she's on the back end, you know, closing the transactions. So I am more than willing to take your call.
Awesome. One more last plug-in, because I knew this from Jensen's side of it. If you guys have a chance, go visit his office. And if, you know, for a lot of us who don't want to have a home office and want an office space outside of their home, or just either they have a further commute to their physical office, you know, Jensen, his office, he has spaces to rent there as well, office space to rent. So
let's just be really clear about the location. The location is next to Round Table Pizza.
Correct.
Best pizza in the world. Round Table Pizza.
You know, there's literally never more than like one car in front of that.
It's so funny. I mean, I'm from Northern California, and Round Table Pizza just dominates. It just owns the market. And moving up here to Washington, it just, people don't get it. They don't understand. They don't even know about it. And it's just amazing, amazing pizza. So
there's a really great Vienna coffee shop as well.
Yep.
That's quite the experience to go to. But I just want to expand on that a little bit. We also have drop-in. So if you don't need a full office, you can actually drop into Mauseth Legal for $250 a month. We will collect all your mail. If you know, during Christmas, we get a lot of Amazon packages sent. You can drop in, use the copy machine, printer, anything like that, and have access to the office, and also our conference rooms to meet clients for $250 a month.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you guys again, and have a great rest of the week. And for those of you attend Rick's Mastermind tomorrow. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes.